Okay, everybody, thanks for coming in again tonight. Tonight we are continuing to look at the Liechtenauer Zettel, specifically this evening talking about the Zornhau, the first of the 5 secret or master strikes. We're going to start off beginning of this by reading through what writes himself about it, and then we'll talk a little bit about that and what our thoughts are. Then we'll look at what Peter von Danzig, one of the other masters, makes commentary about and how he fills in some of the gaps for us. And then at the end of class, I know some people have some video of their own performances of these, so we'll look at some of that, and we'll do a little critique for everybody. So, we ready to get started then? Okay, so I'm going to start off by reading the initial verse first. This is on page 97 of In St. George's Name. It's the beginning part here going over the Zettel itself. The wrath stroke. Who strikes at you above, the wrath stroke threatens him with the point. If he becomes aware of it, take it away above without fear. Be strong against it, wind and thrust. If he sees that, take it down. Note this. Strike, thrust, posture, soft or hard, instantly and before and after. Your war should not be in haste. Who tends the war above gets shame below. In all winding, learn to find stroke, thrust, and slice. Also, you should apply stroke, thrust, or slice in all encounters if you want to fool the masters. The 4 openings. 4 openings, no. Aim so you hit certainly, without any danger, without regard for how he acts. To counter the 4 openings, if you want to avenge yourself, break the 4 openings with skill. Double above, transmute below correctly. I say this to you truthfully. No one can defend himself without danger if you have correctly learned. He will scarcely manage a strike. So, good amount of tactical talk there, huh? What are people's first thoughts just looking at that alone?
This is really about
kick,
controlling.
no can defend.
Sorry, Sarah, what?
Crane kick, no can defend.
Oh, little karate kid. I think there's a little more, yeah, but that kind of thing. The idea of something that is very hard to defend against. Ashley, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, it's really about controlling the situation, right? And getting control and then being able to pivot from there and say, okay, well, now I have all these different things that I can do. And then if I execute them correctly, then it's crane kick, right? So.
Yeah. You go into it with the right kind of plan, the right kind of strategy, and they can't stop it.
Exactly.
Basically, also what I got out of it is like have always a backup plan for whatever your opponent comes at you with.
Always good. Yeah. Okay, so let's just kind of break this down section by section here. I think the first 2 lines are actually, I should say the first 4 lines are actually pretty useful. Who strikes at you above, the wrath stroke threatens him with the point. If he becomes aware of it, take it away above without fear. Those 2 basic things right there are talking about the wrath point, the stroke itself. So there's that initial Zornhau that threatens him with the point. So that's that idea of just coming straight in and making that initial attack. And if he becomes aware of it, take it away above without fear. That's talking about that technique of the abnehmen, where when we go to do the Zornhau and our parry goes, oh no, and pushes aside so they don't get hit, we just take it away above without fear and strike around, right? One of these. Be strong against it, wind and thrust. If he sees that, take it down. This is actually one of those things that, I mean, obviously we know winding, but one of the things that we see here is that if he goes to wind, or if you go to wind and you're up here and he gives you some action to take you offline, you can do that simple change through while keeping the hands high, so that instead of being here lined in at your face, you drop the point underneath, and you can come in lower with an attack while still having a high line of defense to use. And my page.
Not the-
I know Liechtenauer makes a point here to mention the concept of instantly before and after again. So this is how important this is. This is like 2 stanzas later in the text, and he's already like, hey, don't forget about vor and knock and index. So that's how significant these things are when it comes to our training, because he's mentioning it over and over and over again. In all winding, learn to find stroke, thrust, and slice. Stroke, thrust, and slice. What is the other word for those? I know some people that have been doing this for a while should remember.
The dry wounders.
Yes, the dry wounder, the 3 wounders. So every action that we have, every cut, every master cut, every winding action, everything that we do with our opponent, we will generally have the chance to do 3 different actions to injure them. One is the cut itself, so that's that percussive strike. Then we have the thrust, obviously, with the point. And then the slice, where we didn't get the cut in directly with that action, but we get a drawing, slicing action. Now, question for everybody: how do you decide those you're going to use in any given pass?
The feeling of the blade when you cross swords.
That's part of it.
Can you repeat the question? I didn't hear it.
How else can you? How do you determine which of those 3 wounders, the cut, the slice, or the stab, to use in any given fight, in any given pass?
What distance?
Yes, exactly. It's a matter of distance. If you find yourself to be a little further away, then the thrust is going to be the most likely, because you've ended up slightly short. You didn't get them with the cut or the stab or the slice. Your point's in front of them, so now you can follow in with the thrust. If you ended up in that just right distance, you might be able to maybe do your Zornhau into their blade, and at the same time strike them in the head or shoulder or neck or something. Then you also have the times when you may end up too close, and just by the geometry of the blades, instead of being here, you end up a little more here, and you didn't get to hit them, but the blade is close to your opponent, in which case you can, with any luck, press it in and then slice either to or from you and get a cutting action that way. Make sense? Excellent. Let's see, we talk about the 4 openings. So what are the 4 openings? I should ask that.
Is that just referring to the 4 corners of the body, like the top half and lower half areas?
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually,
upper right, upper left.
Then
lower right, lower left. Yep. Do you have Jack? Do you have your new handkerchief right there?
Yes, I do.
So there's the 4 openings. If we can see that on Jack's right now, there's that upper right, upper left, lower right, lower left. I believe that Jack. I believe that that's the basic idea we're talking about. But some illustrations, like I believe there's one in Meyer that actually shows that same sort of principle, that cross of upper right, left, lower right, left, in reference to the body. but also another smaller version across somebody's face. So the idea being that you can, a strike to the lower opening can be down here to the body, but it also can be up underneath, say, somebody's jaw or something like that as well.
If I may interject, I actually have a diagram that this is for Saber, but I think this might be relevant.
Seems
Oh
nice.
yeah, I like that one.
This is the
What
Muller,
source is
the
that?
Philip Muller for Saber.
This is the Muller? Okay.
So, yeah. Hopefully that's relevant.
There was another diagram in Meyer that I came across that was talking about the 4 openings, but it labeled, oh, there it is. This one.
Oh, yeah, that's the one that actually, if you look at that, it's labeled with the master cuts. There's the Scheidel, the Shield, the Zorn.
That's what those
That's what
letters
those are.
stand for. Oh, I didn't even read below it, and it tells you.
You got to read the book.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm assuming you said you just got it, so
when I got it, I just was skimming through it, so I never really had the chance this week to actually sit down because I've had a long week with work and everything.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean. I'm trying to see if I can find it because I'm not an expert with Meyer. I've just done some work with it. I found the one you're looking at, but I can't find the one.
It's on page 80. Is if you're looking for that diagram, or the cutting square itself is on page 72, and then Zornhau is on page.
Here it is.
7.
Page 111. We have the illustration of. Let me get a little closer to the camera. Unfortunately, the website Liechtenauer is down right now, so I can't pull stuff up online. But if you look here, right, this guy here has the cross on his body to show the 4 openings, but he also has a mini version of it on his face because you're going to have the body as a target, but you're going to have the face as a target as well. I know that's a little shaky. I'm sorry. I expect better of myself with this kind of stuff, but it's the best I can do right now. So that's just some concept of targeting there. You can hit to the lower opening, but you can hit to the lower opening of the face. So sorry, let me open the book here. So an interesting thing, one thing that I think is kind of interesting here is 4 openings, no aim, so you hit certainly without any danger, without regard for how he acts. I think there's a tactical point here that should be made, that you don't want to just keep cutting to the same opening. You have to know all 4 of the openings, the different angles of attack, because as you continue to press an attack on an opponent, when you vary up which opening you're going the whole time, they're going to have to react drastically. If you just keep hitting even on the same side, just above, below, over and over again, they're going to have an easier time being able to just parry. But if they have to crank over this way and then get up high and then come back down low and then high and then down low over here, and they're moving around each spot, it makes it much more difficult for them to be able to throw a counterattack at you, because they're having to worry about defending which openings. I know our student Clara, who trained with us for quite a while, one of her favorite things is to begin by throwing, whether it's a Zornhau or just an Oberhau, but coming into the fight with that right Oberhau to the upper left opening, aiming at on your opponent's helmet or shoulders here, and then immediately after that she turns it into an Unterhau to the opposite side. So upper left, lower right. That's her favorite little combo. So the next time Clara comes visit, as soon as she's parry, and then turn the flug on the left, or on the turn the flug on the right, and she'll just walk right onto your point. It's hilarious.
Oh, Clara.
Yeah, we love Clara, but I love being able. Okay, this is just I get to sit there and watch every single one of you, every single class, doing all this training. So I get to pay attention to every little nuance. And I mean, that's part of my thing as the instructor is I look at these details and I use that to give you feedback to make you better fighters. But it also means that I know every twitch and nuance that you guys do. So I kind of know how to counter and alter plans and things on you a little better than maybe other people would.
However, Chris, it goes the opposite way. Just for the record. Because we watch you just as much as you watch us.
That's true. I'm kind of up there in the middle. It makes it fun. I miss class. I miss you guys.
Yeah, I can't wait until class goes back up together, though.
Hopefully not too much longer.
Yeah.
The thing I heard from the town was that they're talking about reopening the town facilities as of the end of May, possibly, depending on what was going on. The other thing that I heard is they were talking about, I heard from somebody else completely unrelated to fencing stuff, that they're talking about gyms reopening in like something like mid-June, because the state's planning kind of a rollout slowly of different areas.
So
if we
just
do
because I
have-
work at a gym, I can talk about that.
Okay, tell us
Yeah,
about
what
it.
do you,
My bosses are
insider
telling
info?
me, that we're looking at mid to end of June where we'll be allowed to open up, and so basically what you said, but I work
Okay.
at one,
So the
so
second half of June.
second half of June is what gyms are looking at the moment.
How certain did you sound?
Okay, because
Email.
so that might be a bit of a guideline for us in a way. We're not a gym, but we are a sports thing, so that might be more what we for. I have thought about what we might do if we're allowed to enter, allowed to do stuff by the town, especially if it's a nicer evening, maybe we'll do some, basically all the solo drills. We'll just stay away from partnered stuff as much as we can and just work on fitness and solo stuff and just cutting patterns and that kind of thing. That way we can at least get moving again. And even then, I was just saying earlier today that we may even wait on when we get to the point where we are sparring again, even like grappling and things like that, we'll kind of shy away from, just to, again, minimize that direct contact and that closeness. And I don't want to be grappling someone, wrestling down to the ground and then, breathing heavy on each other. And yeah, it's an interesting time.
I was gonna ask about if before things start opening again, if we're allowed. I don't know if you just said this or not. There's a lot of noise happening here. If we're allowed to use the field and just like do stuff on the baseball field outside the building, like not, I guess it technically would be class, but we wouldn't be using the inside of the building. We just would be there in the grass.
I feel like from my talk with the town, the recreation director, it's that whole thing about they don't want groups to congregate currently. Even that's why like the playgrounds are closed. The playground would be probably okay.
I
Even
forgot about
the
that.
basketball courts, because you could go and play basketball by yourself, or maybe just with like an immediate family member that you've been quarantined with or something. But they don't want risk of anybody meeting up and then now, oh, there's 3 people playing basketball, I'm gonna go, and then next thing you know there's 15 people or kids on the court and whatever. So I think it'd be different if it was like, say the 2 of you went out and went down to the playground and did some training versus an organized class looking setup.
Yeah, that makes sense. I forgot about the whole, no groups
Everything.
larger than 5 or 6 or whatever it is.
Yeah,
So I can't
I just
participate.
don't want to get us in trouble with the town, because they do nice for us. Like they give us a really good deal, so I don't want to piss them off.
Yeah.
I'm
And
ha- I'm going to have to keep
What was that,
isolating.
Robin?
I'm going to have to keep isolating until after my surgery because I can't risk becoming infected before I go in the hospital when I've already been put off.
All right, someone get a tablet so when we start practicing again, we can FaceTime Robin, and she can be
Yeah.
there.
Be there virtually, yeah. We'll just live stream every class for her.
I'll pack a ruler with me to the hospital so I
We
can
can do
like.
that. Hey, borrow my broken one.
I don't
It's
think
small.
they'll
See?
end with. I'll be
I have my other one. I have
my
my
own.
spatula shaped one at work. I keep it under my desk.
I know for the first week I won't be worth anything because I'll be on some really cool drugs, and
Yeah.
you know I can't get up by myself, and I'll be in essentially a turtle shell. But after that,
Yeah. You'll get back into it eventually. Just gotta give it time. Give yourself time.
I'm told I can drive in about 2 weeks, so
That's not bad.
yeah.
And if I'm to be perfectly honest, I'm actually more afraid of contracting MRSA than coronavirus from just because of the degree we all sweat. And MRSA doesn't sound like a lot of fun either.
I would not like either of those things, but yes, yeah.
And stay at the hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll continue on a little bit here. So we were
What
going
page are
over
you on?
we are on 98 of St. George's Name to counter the 4 openings. If you want to avenge yourself, break the 4 openings with skill. This is the part that I think is important here. Double above, transmute below. Double and transmute. Does anyone remember what this is from class? One of those
Duplieren?
engagements from the bind?
Duplieren and Mutieren?
Yes, I heard it. Yes, Duplieren and Mutieren. Now, my own feeling on these is in terms of all the different counters and things that transitions that happen in the bind from one counter to the next. I honestly will say I don't feel like it's something that I've seen explicitly said in the manuscripts, but just in my own experiences of working with these and looking at the manuscripts, what I found is that the Duplieren and Mutieren work best when the fight changes. And by that I mean if we've come into a bind and they give me a solid amount of pressure and just take my point offline, then doing the abnamen where I just release pressure and cut around to the opposite side is the optimal choice. If I get that medium pressure, winding into ox and getting my point in. I get that low pressure, boom, right in my Zornhau. But the Duplieren and Mutieren, in my experience, work best when that pressure changes during the bind. So I've come in, I've started with some, receiving some significant pressure from an opponent, and then maybe they squeak in mid-action, or they started to do something they thought they'd change their strategy up a little bit. That's where I find that following in with maybe the Mutieren or something like that is best when your opponent's pressure changes in the middle of an action. Everyone's, your mileage may vary. Anyone else notice anything like that?
Oh, I
If anyone's putting
realize
anything
that
in chat, I don't see it right now.
I realize also on a side note that since maybe going over all this context, I feel like I'm getting a better understanding of the longsword itself and the study of it all.
Oh, excellent. Well, that's kind of the idea here. That part of the idea of running this class was obviously because we can't meet up in person, so that kind of sucks, let's be honest. But doing this and having this online, there's a lot of times when we're doing regular class and we get an hour, hour and a half, and we get to do drills. And by the time we do our warm-ups, we do our exercises, our solo stuff, we get into drills. We can't sit down really and read this stuff in depth and talk about it and whatever, because it's like, okay, well, we got 20 minutes left. We got to finish exercises for the night. There's only so much time we get. So I think this is actually, and I think maybe even in the future, this is something that we do not just because of coronavirus, but maybe not as regularly as we will be doing it for now. But I think this is a useful exercise where we'll have these at least online meetings where we can look at a specific source, and whether it's online or whether people pick up books, and we go into in depth about the meaning and what some of these things are saying. I think it'll help, just like you're saying, Jack. It'll help inform everyone else on the class, be a little more familiar with the material itself.
Yeah.
Or do I sound crazy?
No.
Good
No.
idea.
Oh, I'd love that.
I
Yeah,
know you sound
that's really
crazy.
good.
No.
At least like we can maybe like do it like a once a month or twice a month thing.
Like a book club.
Yeah, basically.
Exactly. Yeah, Kelsey, that's just it. It would be like a historical fighting book club. And maybe we can even talk to Connor and see about like some of these saber manuals if we're looking at any of this, or if we plan on doing some, at some point doing some dagger work. We could have online class about the there's the half sword. I know there's a section here about, in the same book, there's a short lesson from, I believe, Lignitzer on the use of the rondel dagger. That's a nice little simple series of techniques. It's just, a short little lesson. So we can do the same kind of things we're doing with this. I think that'd be fun.
And it also kind of helps put the theory, or it puts the practice into theory, which is my favorite aspect about discussing the material like this. Sure, we're not, it's not person to person, we're passing the book around, whatever, but we are discussing it, and that is, I think, I think you can't have one without the other. You sort of have to talk about the material and practice it. But,
yes.
What do I know?
I'll say that I think straight up beginners in the first couple months or so or whatever of ever picking up a sword, I don't think there's as much significance of like looking at the text material for that level of student. But once you're starting to really get into, okay, now here's the different techniques, when it's just stand with your left foot forward, go on guard, and make this basic attack, it's one thing. But once we start getting into a series of techniques and follow-ons and counters, that's when I think, that's where I personally think the texts start becoming significant.
I think this is hopology at its finest. This is because that's probably how it was taught back in the day, back in the 14th, 15th centuries. It's like, okay, we'll teach you how to cut, and if you survive your first battle, then we'll teach you the stuff that's really good and really fun.
And if you were a Lanchnexer in his 50s that had been through several battles, you'd probably sit down by the campfire at night and everyone would be like, so how have you not died in the last 20 years? Like,
it's like, and yeah, that's probably exactly how it went. But again, how do we
there's
know?
only so much we know about the background of some of the characters, essentially, in some of these stories, because they don't give that little blurb at the beginning of a book. Like, if you have a modern novel, the last page or the first page will be that, about the author bit, like so-and-so was born in Connecticut and lived there and went to school and what has 5 cats, whatever. Medieval manuscripts tend to not have that, so we don't know much about them. I will say, just as random trivia, we do know that Master Paul Cowell, who is the author of one of my favorite manuscripts that many of you have seen. The whatchamacallit, famous Birdman.
My eyes.
That one is we do know a decent amount about Pascal's at least career working for Archduke or not Archduke Duke Ludwig the Rich, because his castle still stands, and there are basically payroll tax information going back centuries in their library. And there's some information that he was paid to be the sword and wrestling master to the king or to the duke and his men. And then there's also reference to the fact that he actually served as, I forgot what the rank was, but like basically an officer when the castle was under siege. He actually was basically drafted into leading a cannon division during that battle, and he later on was a tax collector. So we don't know every little detail about his life, but because of all things tax records, we do know that he was employed by this guy for many, many years and made a good sum of money.
Enough to publish a book, that's for sure.
Oh, here we go. Okay, so let's look at, we've looked at the Liechtenauer's verse itself. Now let's look at what the pseudo Peter von Danzig 44A8 has to say about this text. First, the wrath stroke with its techniques. Who strikes at you above, the wrath stroke threatens him with the point. We were talking about that earlier. He writes, note, the Zornhau breaks with the point all Oberhau, or strokes from above, and yet is nothing but a simple peasant stroke. And do it thus. When you come to him in the Zufeschen, and he strikes from his right side above to your head, then strike also from your right side from above without any parrying wrathfully onto his sword at the same time. Sorry. Any parrying wrathfully onto his sword at the same wow, it has been a long day. We'll just redo that. Then strike also from your right side from above without any parrying wrathfully onto his sword at the same time as him. If he then if he is soft at the sword, shoot the point straight in forward and long, and thrust to his face or breast. Thus plant upon it. So again, I think the Zornhau a lot of times is something that we have a pretty straightforward understanding of in terms of the mechanics of it, in that we're cutting in and taking that center line. Both people are cutting in from the outside with that cut from above, but the Zornhau comes straight in the center instead of continuing downward. What I think is interesting here is the beginning part of this from von Danzig, where he says, and yet is nothing but a simple peasant stroke. So he's telling us that this is not a complex technique, super tricksy move. This is just a slight variant on the same thing that you do if you put a weapon in anybody's hands. They naturally want to do this. It's just comfortable. But then after that, we talk about if he comes in from the Zufeschen, we talk about the logistics of how to do this, which is just simple. If he's cutting at you, take the center line, correct? So what do people have to say about that? Comments?
Mason?
I know, Connor, we were talking a little bit before this got official,
okay.
so I thought I'd ask you what
yes.
you were... Yeah.
I think I think there might be a little bit more, and I've given this a lot of thought, that there might be just a little bit more technique involved when it comes to the Zornhau, because I think it's more where and when to cut than it is just how to cut. Because how did I put it? I always say it way better before, so I should have saved it. But basically, if you cut in, and your opponent does at the same time, you obviously don't want to bind. You want to bind at a more particular point on your opponent's sword. So it's not so much that you're both doing Oberhau and just meeting in the bind. It's more that you're meeting right here, so you can have that instead of just right in the middle, or God forbid, right there. So
Okay.
So you cut in right here, right on your opponent's weak of their sword, and boom, you're able to just put it aside, or even better, maybe even right here. I know my hands are big on camera, but I think it's more timing and distance that makes a Zornhau than just an Oberhau is a Zornhau. Sure, it is more or less the same cut, but I think it's when you take advantage of just that split second. And admittedly, in sparring, I've only done it successfully once. That was a long time ago, and I did it once, and when it happened, I sort of flinched and blinked. I was like, "Oh no!" But hey, I did it. Somehow, by some miracle, I did it. And I guess that was sort of my aha moment. It's like, oh, so that's a Zornhau. It's not so much when, it is all about when and where you strike on your opponent's sword. Not so much just, boom, you're in the bind, this is what you do.
That's like how I'm sparring. It's like I don't like Zornhau is like one of those that don't come to me instantly because it's like something that I have to really think about before I go into the fight, kind of thing.
Anytime.
Okay, so
I was
thoughts
gonna
when it
come
comes to this, and I don't. Okay, yeah. Go ahead, Trevor.
I was gonna say that I think Connor's right a little bit, that it is just the basic peasant's cut, but it's what you're doing with it. You're trying to displace the blade so you can hit, and it's as soon as you connect, it's what you do immediately after. Just based on all the other 5 cuts we've done in class, I would kind of call this one the sneakiest of all of them, just because it has the most you can do with it. If your first hit doesn't work, you just seem to work from there. As long as there's a bind, you seem to be able to work from it.
I was going to say it's really super effective if you catch your opponent sleeping on the job. If they're not paying attention and you are super quick, then you can get a point in the best way, because then you're essentially saving energy as well.
And Sarah, you're saying that from the perspective of using that, taking the initiative. You're the one initiating the Oberhau, correct? You're both in the scenario of you're both sitting on guard, and the other opponent hasn't done anything yet. Then throwing your Zornhau and taking that center line from the get-go gives you that tactical advantage. This is material that, for me, I mean, I love hearing what everyone's thinking too, because you don't want to get in your own head too much on this stuff. And I don't know if I can find it this quickly, but this is a very interesting conversation. I'm having a lot of fun. Thank you, Connor, for inspiring this. But a lot of what I get from, okay, so I've sort of personally fused a lot of the principles of my Zorn with the concept of the Sprechfenster, the speaking window. And that's that technique later on in the manuscript that talks of, where's my little guy go? There he is. Talking about playing from here, where my sword is out in front of me. I've bound on my opponent's sword, and now I react. I do my plays from there as needed. However, that's, yeah, Sarah, there's your favorite. But I work from
really
the bind.
hate you right now.
but I work from the bind based on where it is. So a lot of times when I do a Zornhau, I'm personally thinking about using that speaking window Sprechfenster and coming in and waiting to see what you do. I'm not just simply putting it out into long point and waiting for you to enter, but I'm taking over the center with that and controlling the center, and then depending on how any of you happen to respond, I'm following in as needed. If you haven't really given me anything, then I can follow in with my straight thrust. If you give me that resistance, whatever option change through, whatever option flows in there from there. So I think that's something that will, so I'll try to, but somebody make a mental note that when we eventually in this lesson get to the speaking window later on, that we bring it up with the Zornhau again, because that's definitely definitely some crossover, at least in my opinion, my thoughts on it. So I think the again, my thoughts that part of this is, like he says, it's nothing but what the peasant throws. There's that initial part of the cut that just seems very cut from above. And I think this is what, Connor, this is kind of what, you know, the fusion of what you were saying, what I was saying. Part of it is also where you meet them on the blade, because I'm not meeting them, not just on their blade, but on my blade as well. I'm not just cutting in and giving that, trying to hit them in the head. I'm not just cutting in, trying to give them that parry, but I am cutting into their sword and following up to the center. So it's not just where you're hitting on their blade. I think it's you're hitting on their blade with the part of the blade you're hitting from yourself.
Exactly, because
If that makes sense.
no, because at some point the geometry of the two blades meeting and just the displacement of one blade or the other, it just has to fall into place naturally at some point or another. At least that's what I've been thinking, and I've given the Zornhau probably more thought than I should have, but just not enough time to practice it with, you know, on the field, so to speak.
Oh, Chris in the comments said Danzig begins the text with, quote, "when he cuts at you." So that's actually an interesting point I had been thinking about earlier as we were all talking about this. Thanks for reminding me about that. Makes another thing pop in my head, but we'll get into that in a second. Quoting him here, "I think this is important too, because the Zorn is being used as a response to your opponent as opposed to a starting action. I'd say the Zornhau is an Oberhau ... with a plan." And I definitely agree with that last part of that of his text there. The Zornhau is an Oberhau with a plan. So we're not just throwing a basic cut in there. We're throwing what seems like a basic cut to someone that may be untrained, but we're coming in with dominance in the center. The bit about being the first part, the Zorn is a response to your opponent not taking initiative and closing. That actually falls into the context, I think. This relates to the Vierversetzen, the four oppositions or counters. The whole idea of when our opponent is in guard, we throw a certain master cut to defeat that, correct? So quick quiz, if our opponent is in Ox, what cut do we use to counter?
Oberhau.
Yep, Krumpau.
Krumpau. The
My bad.
crooked cut.
Yep, Krumpau. If our opponent is in Flug.
Oh, Shielhau.
The squinter stroke.
Shielhau, yes. And when our opponent, yep, the Squinter. And if our opponent's in Alber,
That's the Scheidel.
that's the Scheidel, yep. The Scheidel or scalp stroke up top. And if our opponent is in Vom Tag. Our thwart or Zerschau. Yep. So I think this is an interesting thing to note here because when we have that section in the later parts of the manuscript, when we talk about those four oppositions, the Vir Versetzen, using that master cuts 2, 3, 4, 5 against guards 1, 2, 3, 4. Zornhau's left out of that. We don't see the Zornhau against that. The closest thing we see is the idea of using the Zornhau against somebody throwing an Oberhau. We don't see the text say throw a Zornhau against somebody in Vom Tag. It says, like Chris points out in the comments, when he cuts at you. So the Zornhau is done against a cut, not against somebody waiting in guard. Now, can it be used against somebody waiting in guard? Yes, I have done this myself. When I see someone being lazy and not paying attention, it may not be ideal because as compared to the Zverch is ending with that high position. So in the action of doing that, I'm cutting off their line of attack, or most likely line of attack, while they're sitting in Vom Tag. Zornhau doesn't give me as much of that. If they push a little harder, if they raise their hands up a little higher, I might not have that same control with a Zornhau against someone in Vom Tag versus a Zverschau. Good comments. I like this. I like having discussions like this. This is great. Any thoughts on that, guys?
It's basically just a huge game of rock, paper, scissors.
Yes. That's another big important aspect of some of this too, is there's this whole thing of here is all the completely clean, perfect, and best ways of doing these things. And anyone that has ever sparred knows none of that barely ever happens. It all turns into a chaotic mess. Yeah. What is the phrase? No plan survive. No strategy survives first contact with the enemy. All we can do is chain stuff together enough that hopefully one thing will work out.
Or as Liechtenauer says, no man defends safely. Or with safety. Whichever it is.
I'm sorry, I missed a lot of that part you were talking because I had to run in my kitchen real quick to get something to drink, and then I muted it, and then I started talking to my mom. So I was in and out of that conversation.
Shame on you.
Oh, we just talked about like the secret 6 master cut that isn't in any of the texts, and it defeats all the others. And unfortunately for I had to end the non-disclosure act, so you just missed it, Jack.
That's okay.
Sorry, Jack.
You're just out of luck. It was the ultimate technique that works with any weapon, but oh well. So, yeah, that's interesting talks about the Zornhau. Oh, okay, I want to try something to see if this works. Share screen. So, I tried this earlier. So I have, oh, I hope I edited this right. I didn't really edit much. Will this let me? There we go. Sorry. What I did was I set, oh, that's too crappy. Hold on. I'm a video guy. I'm very particular. Okay, so this is the Oberhau. Nope, that's a Zornhau. So if I play this out, I had a few video files here. So when we're talking about a Zornhau delivered just in the air here, as I come in with a cut, boom. But I stop, extend it out here in long point, so that way I can thrust in to an opponent. Just as an example there.
Like a Liechtenauer rock'em sock'em.
And then there's the winding.
I actually have a question about one thing from the winding. You know, I think it's from the Zornhau, is where you are in ox when you are in the winding, right? And then you change to ox the other side. That's part of the Zornhau too, right?
Well, there's a few different ways of doing that. I wouldn't say that's part of the Zornhau specific, but that is part of the winding. There are the different windings where you come in and start to wind. You know, there's that first wind here, just like I showed in the video a second ago. Zornhau, or however we've gotten there, and the wind. If our opponent gives us just enough pressure that we can't get in with that wind, what we can then do is step in and wind to the other side often, keeping the point in line, and come in on the other side. Same thing if we're down in flug, we can be in flug here, and we can wind to this side, and when our opponent pushes our point, we can wind back, and again continue to just keep turning and driving that point at our opponent.
Okay.
So I think I know what you're saying, Jack. I wouldn't say that's part of the Zornhau proper. That is one of the follow-on techniques of winding. Make sense?
Because when I was practicing it outside yesterday, I was like, oh, if I go like that, I can just snap to the other side, and basically, I can't remember what it's called, but I was like, I don't know if it's part of the Zornhau, but it's like a technique I can use. Kind of if they give me enough pressure, I can just snap to the other side.
It sounds and looks like a Zwerchau.
That's what I'm thinking of then, maybe.
Yeah, okay, so it depends. If you're keeping the point online and simply changing sides from ox left to ox right, then I would refer to that as a winding action. If you're going from ox left around to ox right, then I would call that a Zwerch.
Okay. That's what I'm kind of thinking of.
Then I would refer to that as a Zwerch. If it's just this, then it's a winding. That is a full cut.
Okay.
And there can be a fine line between those two, but as a general principle. Okay, so let's go on to the next section here. This is the text and gloss of another technique of the Zornhau. Liechtenauer writes, if he becomes aware of it, take it away above without fear. So this is one that I know many of us have worked on. And gloss, note this is when you have struck at him with the wrath stroke, then thrust your point long into his face or chest, as was described before. So that's that we're cutting in and we're trying to get the thrust. If he then becomes aware of the point and parries strongly by pressing your sword to the side, then slash upwards with your sword on his blade and up and off his sword and strike his other side again on his and strike to his other side again on his sword blade to the head. This is called the taking away above, oben abgenommen, or Counter it thus: when he takes off above, then bind strongly on his sword above head with the long edge. So, thoughts on that?
That's basic. Oops.
So I think this. Go ahead, Jack.
I didn't realize. I thought I was muted for a second. I was like, oh, I have to unmute first. I was saying basically that's basically like taking over like the kind of taking over the pressure of his blade, right?
Yeah, if he's giving you a lot of pressure.
Got it.
So this is one of those really basic counters on for you, Jack, in particular. We're on page 113, kind of towards the bottom there. This is that basic principle when I've come in, I've thrown my Zorn, or I've at least attempted to, and instead of being able to get in with the point, he's given me that resistance and given me that offline push. So instead of trying to struggle and get back over here, I'm going to come off above and strike down to the opposite side. So instead of being over here, I'm cutting around to here. I know we do this one pretty naturally. This is also very useful when it comes to a lot of beginner or LARPer type or whatever, people that don't have any like formal training. When you come in and cross swords with them, and especially if you've tried to do your Zornhau, a lot of times their first reaction is, oh my God, there's a sword coming at my face, and they try to push away. And then once they try to push the sword away, whoop, sneak around.
Is that the same thing that we did? I don't think it is because we did this recently before the quarantine, where there was a lot of pressure on your sword. You like just flick it up and around to the other side.
Yep, that's what he's describing here. See, we're putting it together. This is the original text, and now we're looking at it from class. Yeah.
Hooray!
Oh, so yeah, Chris in the comments made a post about the fact that this is actually illustrated very well in Paul's Cal, and I definitely agree. Unfortunately, I don't know if you knew this, Chris, but Liechtenauer is down today because I had planned to, like last time, have all, I was going to have all this stuff, you know, loaded on Pages so I could scroll through the pictures easily. But Chidester posted something that they were doing maintenance on the website, so the site's down, so we can't get into that. But I do have the actual book over here. It's not as pretty as loading it up on the screen for you guys, but I do have the book, so I can actually find those illustrations for you. One sword. Okay, so this is a big book. There is the illustration of the Zornhau. Now, one thing that I like to point out in this too is the guy in the red pajamas there. That's Paul Scal himself, and you notice his posture when he's doing this. He's not level it out a little bit. There we go. He's not leaning forward with his thrust. He's pushing forward with his hands a little bit, but look at his posture. He's standing nice and straight. He's got a very solid foundation, a very solid platform to work from. So he's not extending his body in making this cut. Now, what he writes here is simply the last stroke threatens him with the point, basically right out of Liechtenauer's verse. The next page is taking off above without fear. And if we look at that one, in this one, if you notice, where is the picture? He is on the other side of his opponent's blade. So he's cut up and over and is struck down to his opponent's right side on the other side of his opponent's blade. And he's still got that same posture, so he still has some protection. And since he's on his opponent's blade a little bit in this case too, he also has the ability to give some resistance to winding or whatever he would need to as a follow-up to that. I also love this manuscript. It's so pretty. I mean, look at that, the big and the...
That is one huge book.
It is a huge book. And it has like a really nice slipcase with some nice cover art and all this stuff on it. It is not a cheap book, I will say, though. Usually I think it's like $100 or over $100 or something like that.
Just for the
But,
record, it never fits a standard bookcase.
Coffee table book.
No, I had to make special room on this bookcase for it. But if there's another COVID stimulus check, I can send out a link if people want to get copies of these. it's a beautiful book. Just as I mean, I wouldn't want to just leave it out on for parties, but it's a beautiful book to just have out at places. It's cheesy. I'll say this: it's a little cheesy of me, I know, but for years, every time I would go to fight in a tournament, armored, unarmored, whatever it was, the night before I'd go fight in a tournament, I'd pick up my copy of Paul's Cowl and read through it, because it's all just quick quotes out of Liechtenauer Zettel and illustrations, and it's just a way, for me to kind of jog my memory about all these different techniques. And yeah, it's just kind of a ritual of mine at this point. I pick it up and just flip through the pages before a fight. Connor, you say something? It looked like you said something, but I don't hear anything.
Sorry about any reactions. I'm right now having text back and forth with my sister and everything. So just give you guys heads up on that. Family
Gotcha,
drama,
gotcha. Yeah, I actually put my phone on mute just in case. Like, not mute, but silenced, whatever.
Yeah, I went downstairs
So
to
I
get
wouldn't
something to
have to
drink,
deal
and
with
I
that while
got the earful of what's going on. And now I'm texting. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
But other than that,
Okay. Next bit here. This is the text and gloss of another Zornhau. Be strong against it, wind and thrust. If he sees that, take it down. Note, this is when you strike in with the wrath stroke, and he parries it and remains in the parrying strongly on the sword. Then remain also strong against him with your sword on his, and go up with your arms and wind on his sword with your hilt in front of your head and thrust above to his face. If he becomes aware of the thrust and goes high with his arms to parry with the hilt, then keep your hilt before your head and set the point down upon his neck or chest between his arms. So, what is that?
Does that mean, is that the one where you like go down from up, or you like bring it around and you do like the quick little tight little thing?
It kind of sounds like a mutieren of sorts.
Okay, so there's two aspects to this. The first part of that is simply just the winding. So it's that I've come in with my Zornhau, and then I've wound up with my crossguard in front of my face to thrust in to get that wind. The next part, this is something that we've done sometimes, but I make the mistake of not going over this enough in class, I think sometimes. But if you've gone to wind, it's not a good counter, but a common biological counter. If someone is giving you pressure in the bind and you start to wind against them, their response a lot of times is to go up with their own sword. It's just very natural because all of a sudden there's a point in their face and they see that. So their first reaction is to go, their just very natural human reaction is to raise their hands and push away. Now, this is where the text says, I lost my page.
Okay, I remember
This is where the text says, if he becomes aware of the thrust and goes high with his arms to parry with the hilts, then keep your hilt before your head and set the point down upon his neck or chest between his arms. So if your opponent parries with Crunk and you've already gone up here into the winding, so you're already high in the winding, drop your point between his hands. Don't counter, withdraw, anything. Just simply illustrated here very poorly, but disengage and come up underneath to the chest or to the throat or face between his hands. Now again, this is something that it's not a good response, so you don't see it all the time, but it's a very natural response for a lot of people. With once you have your point in their face, their reaction is, oh no. So that's something to be ready for. As soon as they start to do that, don't bother trying to fight against it. Just change through. stab.
Pokey pokey.
That's also good to use. It's a good technique for people that are taller. That that's a lot of us tend. If say Connor, you're fighting with me, if my hands are high at all, it's not a bad strategy. If I push up, even if I don't exaggerate it that much, if I pushed up, there's a lot more of me underneath than there is of you, so you can just drop underneath and come in. Except, now that I'm saying it, don't do it against me. Do it against Jack, because.
After you do it, just move on.
So all I'm getting
I'll
from
take
this
note
is,
of that every time then.
all I'm getting from this is never go into Crown God. Like the scalper and this, both are telling me never do Crown God.
Yeah, I don't think it. I don't think it's a great move. Yeah, Connor, I think there's something with your microphone. We're not hearing you at all.
Here, can you hear me now?
I was seeing a
yeah,
lot of
there it is. Now I
gesturing
hear
and
you.
Okay.
not hearing anything.
Because it's funny because Corona, I find, becomes more. It's more of a practice guard in Italian longsword than German. In German, it's like, yeah, we have it. It's an option. But in Italian, it's like, we like this. We use it often, and it translates to Corona. So.
You're telling me
But
of all the things.
but one thing I do want to say, and that I have read before, it's that it's very dangerous to leave the bind. So when is it okay to ever leave the bind, and can the bind ever be reestablished in a single play?
Okay, so that's a good question. I do not like leaving the bind if my opponent still has any sort of threat that they can still have on me. If they are still in any sort of presence, I do my best to not release them from the bind, because as soon as I release them, then they are free to make some other attack, like you're saying. However, if they are doing something like this, like we're talking about, where they're parrying with Crunk, they're raising their hands up, it falls under the same or similar category as like knock rising, following after. The same thing with the abgenommen. If they've pushed so far, whether it's up or to the sides or down, when they've committed so much that you can't fight the bind back to them, then leave the bind and come
Okay.
around to another
All
opening.
right.
And then, and when you do it, always make sure to keep it as a relatively tight action. Here, in this this example against the winding and Crunk, it's just my hands are staying in front of my face. I'm not dropping my hands down. I'm simply turning the point from the high guard already.
Okay. All right.
So it's going to be a very quick and subtle action.
So yes. All right. So it's
know,
all very situational. Okay.
Yes, there's the idealized version of it, and then there's the oh shit real world version of it.
Okay.
But I know Chris again in the comments said he pointed out that of all things, as we were talking about this idea of if he raised his hands, came through underneath. One of the lines from Liechtenauer's verse in the same stanza, but just later on the same stanza says, "He who tends to the war above is shame below." It's the same thing. If your opponent is focused so much on the fight happening up here, he's vulnerable down below. So I think this falls into kind of what you're saying, Connor. Because your opponent is pushing up and focused so much up high and driving the fight up here, that it gives you the opportunity to come through underneath. Okay. This is the text and gloss of another lesson of the Zornhau. Note this: strike, thrust, Posture soft or hard, instantly and before and after, without haste. Do not be over eager in the war. Von Danzig goes on to say, note, this is when he has bound on your sword with a stroke, thrust, or otherwise. Then you should not rush to the winding before you have determined, once the swords have clashed, whether he is soft or hard in the bind. And once you have found this out, then work instantly with the winding according to the soft or hard, always to the next, according to the soft or hard, always to the next opening, as you will find explained and taught in the techniques hereafter. So I know Ashley and Sarah, you two, Sarah still in here? Sarah might be gone. But actually, you and Sarah are working on drilling just this idea, just this weekend, that when you come into the bind from the Zornhau, you determine, once the swords have crossed, where their pressure is going, what the feeling is in their sword, and then decide which way to go, whether it's winding high or coming off or thrusting or whatever. So, I mean, as Ashley, as someone that has just gotten exposed to that, what do you, what can you put together between what you worked on with steel and what you heard me read out?
Well, so for me, it's really all about trying to.
I can't hear you. Oh, there we go.
Okay. So for me, it's really all about trying to understand, since it's the first few times I've done this, is the pressure I'm feeling gauging from that person, is it going to be different person to person, or is it simply different based on how I'm responding to it? So there's some of that learning as well, just feeling like, does it feel different from, when Sarah is sparring with me than when you're sparring with me, Chris? And then just sort of understanding, where do I fit? Where does my response typically fit in those different pressures? So it's a lot more complicated than I thought it would be, honestly, to try to feel it out.
In addition to
Yes,
that,
and
in addition to that, the pressure can change like when you start to make your first move. Like,
Right.
I'm a very timid person, so like if we're in a bind and you start to move, I'm probably gonna let my pressure off a little bit, which I shouldn't do, but like the pressure can even change like halfway through whatever it is you're trying to do.
Right, and then you have to respond to it, right? So there's that extra level. So what you think you're going to do immediately, and then trying to do it again, trying to follow up with what the proper response is.
My thing is, I wait too long for a response. Like, I call it the sitting duck. I'm like a sitting duck when I'm sparring. I wait till someone makes the first move, or I think sometimes I should make the first move. So it's like,
It's
yeah, I know. And sometimes, Jack, you've hesitated. You get into the bind and you stop and you're thinking about, wait, which thing do I want to do? And while you're thinking about which thing you want to do, someone else hits you.
Sarah caught me a few times with that, where I was kind of like thinking through, and I was like, okay, wait. But I've given her permission just to smack me. Just
Sorry,
wake me up.
Ashley.
Just wake me up. It's okay.
I'm a New Yorker. I fight dirty.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I gotta get hit.
It's
parlay.
in swords and love, consent is important.
I think we're all guilty of that when it comes to sparring. It's like, okay, I did this. What do I do next? It's like, okay, it's
Yeah,
like
we've all had that moment where a lot of times we've had the moment where we thought this is what's going to happen, and then the other person did something weird, and that suddenly is not how we thought it was going to be. And then a lot of times we've all done that, where you're then like, oh, that didn't work. Oh crap.
So
What do I do now? And then
And
you're
now
messing
I'm
around.
dead.
You're trying to think of.
Yeah, Chris,
Mhm.
were you there when Yanush was fighting with Dagger and somebody else had to fight with a poleaxe or something?
what?
Yeah,
You
that was
remember?
unfair. Yeah.
It was, but here's the thing: is even so, I'm gonna throw out Christian's name. Even Christian, who's been studying this stuff for how many years? I was sitting next to him when this happened.
30.
They did a Fortune's Favor kind of tournament where you rolled what you got, and so there were people that were fighting with daggers and poleaxes. And sorry, the kids are watching a movie. but they were fighting with daggers and poleaxes, and you rolled what you got, and every weapon was assigned a name. It was super fun to watch. But so I'm next to Christian, and I'm like, why
Longsword,
doesn't?
sword and buckler, messer, dagger, poleaxe, and spear.
Yeah, it was something like that. So it was a lot of fun, but Yanush, poor Yanush, had to have a little dagger to somebody else's. I don't know who he was fighting. It doesn't matter, but it was like a spear or poleaxe. So I asked Christian, who was right next to me, I said, why doesn't Yanush just throw the dagger at him and at least score at least 1 point against him? And Christian's like, it will never happen. You can't guarantee that it's going to hit him. Then you'd lose your weapon and da da da. And like right after I'd asked him that question, he had answered, Yanush throws it and hits whoever it was square in the chest. It was like the most perfect throw. You cannot duplicate it ever again. And Christian leans over to me and says, forget everything I just said. So you have somebody who has studied this stuff for decades, right? Who still, gets surprised by things when it
In the
happens.
chaos of an actual fight,
Right.
yeah.
So you
That's-
can plan for it all you want. Robert Burns, the best laid plans of mice and men getting off to Glay. They always get screwed up. So
That's kind of like the time that was sparring Luke, and me and Luke came into the bind, and both I think Luke had my sword in one hand, and I had my sword still in one of my hands, and I had a free hand. What I did is I punched him square in the face.
I know he was proud of you. And then if I remember, in the next play, he like slammed you down on the ground for that. But it was
Yeah.
totally worth it for
It
getting
was
that hit
like
on it.
basically a, oh no, what do I do now? Hey, I got a free hand. Let me just punch it, because that's kind of, I know it's not in the text, but it could be in the text because you never know.
I did the same thing to you, Chris. We were doing sword and buckler, and you kind of left yourself open with one hit, and I was like, oh wait, I have a small punching thing in my left hand, and I just punch you square in the face.
That's one weapon I really want to learn, though, is sword and buckler.
It's
I mean,
fun.
there are pictures of a guy fighting in a hole with a girl with a rock. So you never know what's in the text. That's legitimately in
There's some
there.
weird stuff.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
I love that illustration. I need to frame it.
Oh god, there's videos depicting that
in the chat.
scenario too. It's weird. It's so kooky.
Duel between man and woman is what it is.
So, the woman wanted to divorce the man, the man coveted his neighbor, whatever.
Yeah,
So led to that, it happens.
Nobody's putting me in a hole. Just saying. I'm fighting in a hole.
The man is in the hole, though.
Oh, yeah, the
man's
guy
in the hole.
has to
That's
fight in the
right.
hole.
The man's in the hole. Okay, just keep him there.
Because that's just medieval sexism at work. It's like, okay, we have to balance it out somehow. So, okay, just make the guy half the woman's height and give him a cudgel. That works.
We just need to dig a hole so we can try it out.
I'm
Anyone got
in.
any gardening
I'm
projects
open.
done?
I'm
Hey,
open for
Christopher,
it.
if you're gonna get in the hole, I can make that happen on Saturday or Sunday.
You
I
got a
will dig
week.
a hole. I
You
will
got
dig
a
a
week.
hole just
Start
for you to
digging.
get into it.
It's got to be like a
Do it.
3 or 4 foot hole. I forgot how deep it has to be. I
Get
don't
all the
even- I
actors
don't
that played in the movie Holes
specify.
that they dug so many holes for that movie. Let them dig up the hole for us.
But if you get that, Sarah, just get a tennis ball piece of fabric to use as the rock in a sleeve.
Okay, I'll put paint on it too, so we can tag you.
That would still hurt.
Yeah.
I can
I'll wear
totally
a
make
mask.
that happen. The kids will dig the hole. Are you kidding me? If I tell them you're getting in it, they will definitely dig the hole.
Quarantine. What are we all doing?
It doesn't even have to be that deep. 3, maybe 4 feet.
Yeah.
Anybody have a road?
See, okay. There's the one downside of doing this without actually being in person with swords, because it's very easy for us to get off topic already. But then when we don't have each other and we're not wearing masks and gloves, our ability to get off topic is like it just skyrockets. We're amazingly off topic.
Let's really blame the real reason of why we're off topic.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I need a refill, actually.
You're not supposed to cheers
Yeah,
an empty cup.
I need a refill too. There's a little bit left in mine. I got the last swig. Yeah, we don't want to do that when we're actually using swords, though.
You can cheer with water, though. I accept that. Empty glass.
I've heard it's
no.
I've heard it's bad luck in
Yeah,
some
that's
cultures, but who tends the war above gets shamed below. That is the next part. I know we brought it up because Chris mentioned it in the comments. But note the war is the winding and the work that follows from it with the point to the 4 openings. And do it thus. When you strike with the wrist stroke, as soon as he parries, then go well up with your arms and wind your point on his sword above to the upper opening on his left side. If he sets off high, if he sets off the high thrust, then remain in the winding with the hilt before your head and let the point sink down to the lower opening again on his left side. If he follows your sword with his parrying, then seek the lower opening on his right side with your point. If he follows your sword further with his parrying, then go up on your left side with the sword and hang the point above to his upper right opening. Thus he will be shamed in the war above and below if you have done this correctly. It sounds like a lot, I know, but really all this is that idea of, I know, Jack, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, but it's the idea that we've started off with, we've come in, we've gone to wind, our opponent raises up or presses our sword, so we change through and look for winding to another opening. Then they give us resistance there, so we look to a wind down below or high with the point low. But the idea is, that we keep winding, looking for those actions, looking for those openings. And our opponent, when they're faced with this very fast circling actions with that point online, they can't do much to counter because their whole thing is just simply pushing you aside, trying not to get stabbed. So the faster and more smooth you can roll between the windings, the less time they have to react to you. Does that make sense?
Basically, when you're doing that, you're kind of messing with their mind a little bit and not giving them an open window to make their next move.
Yes. Yeah. As compared with something like that with a thrust, Jack, that's a good call. They're because you're keeping the point online in their face, you're not offering as much threat as, say, when you're throwing that initial Oberhau, you're cutting in from range and that very percussive strike. But just having that steel in front of their face, it changes their kind of psychology a little bit.
Because it's basically like
I know
having
I've done this a few times.
What I was saying
go ahead, Jack.
It's basically kind of like having a gun pointed at your head the whole time.
You're keeping them off balance.
I wish
to think pretty much, yeah.
Yes. I wish Luke was here tonight. He's not in the chat, unfortunately. I'm not sure where he is, but I know he said this. So this isn't a rondelle, but this is just a dagger I have sitting here. I don't have a. Oh, there's a rondelle. Ugh. Oh, it's not the sharp one. But so we have the rondelles that we use for class, just like those rubber ones. And Luke's helped me out at a few different demonstrations and things over the last couple of years. And we're always working with the rondelles in class, like those black cold steel ones. Well, at one of the demos, I had not this one. This one is a dull one, but I have. It's gonna bother me now. Sorry, I don't know where it is, but I have my actual sharp rondelle somewhere around here, and I had that for the sake of just doing the demonstration. I had it actually wearing it on my belt during the day, and I was talking about, rondel, knightly daggers, blah, 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 doing my little presentation thing. And I showed it on Luke, and I just did some, obviously we're going careful. We weren't wearing masks or anything, but I just held it to his face with the actual sharp rondel. And I saw him flinch, unlike I never see him do it before. And he made the comment to me afterwards, after the demo. He was like, "You've done that move to me dozens of times, and it's never bothered me before. But as soon as you put a steel tip in my face, I couldn't help but pull back." When you have these things where, we're used to wearing tons of safety gear and masks and gloves and stab-proof jackets and rubber-tipped swords and plastic training daggers and all this kind of stuff, it's one thing, and it's a lot of fun. But when you actually feel cold steel pressed into your skin or have it in your face, there's something very human that comes out with that. That's, regardless of training, you start to sweat a little bit more. It suddenly has a little more realism to it than it does otherwise. It's somewhat unrelated, but part of the reason why for more intermediate level students I encourage either light or no gear sparring in a controlled way, not all out aggressive, but I encourage people to do some light controlled sparring without masks on, because when your opponent goes and whines in your face with his sword and you don't have a mask, your counter strategy tends to be different than when you had full protective gear and you weren't worried.
Only with our instructors, okay, because I've had some, I've, even with nylon weapons, I've had some scary close calls without masks and without gloves. And
I do have to come clean about this part. I had my one friend come up from New York City, not Justin, my other friend Nick came up, and I was outside training, and he came outside and he was like, "Fight me." I was like, "Okay." So I gave him one of my synthetics, and I had the other synthetic, and I was fighting him like carefully and doing like techniques. And the way he did them, he tried to mimic me, but when he went to ox, he held it really close to his face. I was like, "What are you doing?" He was like, "This is the way actually you got to do it." I was like, "No, watch what I do. Let me teach you." He was like, "No, I just want to do what I can do better probably than you." He was like, "Oh," and I was like, "Man, just give up." And I, like, my brother-in-law and nephew was watching from the window, and after we were done fighting everything, my brother-in-law was like, "I was betting on you winning anyway," because he looked like he was getting tired at the end. I was like, "Yeah," because he didn't know what he was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there's a lot of simple bad motions and things that if you aren't trained for, you can do ox relatively close to the head, but there's no level of shock absorption against an incoming blow. If I'm doing some of the things like one of the counters to the Zwerchau, then my ox is going to be very up here, very close to the head, but that's simply contextual in one case. Because there's always exceptions.
Chris, Em's raising her hand. What do you want to say?
Yes. Yes, Em.
Hi, honey. She raised her hand just to say hi.
Yeah. Okay, say goodnight, Em.
You just want to say hi, hon?
Hi and good night at the same time.
Bye.
Good night.
Everybody.
Good night.
good night.
I just have a cat passed out on the floor. It's not as dramatic as having a little elementary school kid.
I'm trying to get my dog to come to bed, but she's afraid of the cat that lives in my house.
Smart dog.
Okay, so that's the bit about that idea of winding, and once we get going on class again, I think we'll look at some of that and we'll do some drills just doing windings to the different openings.
Can I interject?
Yes. Yes.
I think we should do more exercises from the bind, just to see how we can and should sneak around and snake around various guards, positions, and into openings. Not so much as a cut into openings, but just sort of as the defender chase the attacker, and as the attacker just try to find, okay, they went this way, how can I attack further into this way, or if I can.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a thought I had tonight. So
yeah, definitely. Let's see. Next section that's the text and gloss. The text and gloss of a lesson from the Zornhau. In all winding, learn to find strokes, thrusts, and slices. Also, you should apply the stroke, thrust, or slice in all encounters if you want to fool the masters. So this is kind of what we were talking a little bit about before, the three wounders, the dry wounder. Note, this means when you have struck with the wrath stroke, then you should be well practiced and ready with the windings on the sword. Winding has three separate techniques. That is a stroke, a thrust, and a slice. And when you wind on the sword, you should always be mindful that you do not execute incorrectly the techniques that pertain to the winding, so that you do not strike when you should thrust, or slice when you should strike, and thrust when you should slice. And thus, you should always know the correct technique to use in all meetings and bindings of the sword if you want to fool or deceive another master who has gone up against you, and how you should use the windings and how many of them there are, you will find described in the last technique of the epitome, which says who leads well and breaks properly. So there's basically the bit at the end is just saying, I go over this again at the end of the text. So I think we kind of had the discussion on this in the very beginning here, but pretty straightforward. What we're talking about is the three wounders and knowing when to use them. Get this girl. She's starting to bother me.
Good night.
Hi, Leia.
Night.
So,
Good night.
Good night, Parker.
Okay, bedtime.
Good night. So the whole idea is that with each one of the winding actions, we'll have the opportunity to use one of the three wounders. And it's important to understand which one to use. I don't think we need to go over this too much again because we talked about it a little bit before, but that really is all about what the range is on our opponent. If we find that we're a little short of distance, if we're short of range from our, ow, you knocked my book over and landed right on my foot. Anyway, if we fall a little short of range and you're just short of your opponent, then that's when you can get the chance to get that thrust. If you've gone to wind, and I think this is sort of what Jack was saying before earlier too, if I'm here and I go to wind and I'm at just the right range, I can add a little bit of rotation to it and get, instead of just here, just straight in, I can get a little bit of a cut action against a blade as well. So I can flick in and drive this in. Obviously, I don't want to do a full withdraw and throw it there, but from that pressure in the bind, I can get a little bit of a pop with the blade. And then, of course, usually when you're closer, if you've come in and you wound and you end up way too close, that's when you can do the slicing on your opponent. So, like I said, I know we talked about that a little bit before. Any commentary on that? Anyone else have anything else to add to that part? I think it's pretty straightforward, right? Like I said, we talked about that earlier on. And, ow, my foot. What a little jerk. No, I still love you, Leia. Okay. Page 115 here. This is the technique and text and gloss of the 4 openings. The 4 openings know aim. So you hit certainly in all courses without doubt for however he ends. Note, one who would be a master of the sword should know how to skillfully seek the 4 openings if he wants to fight correctly and surely. The first opening is the right side, the second is... Okay, sorry. The first opening is the right side, and the second is the left half above the belt of the combatant. The other 2 openings are the right and left sides below the belt. Okay, so specifically in the earlier text here, we are talking about the waist line, the belt line, as the specific point for upper and defining upper and lower opening. The other 2, sorry, let's see. Lower opening. First, you should seek them from the Zufeschen with the chasing, the Nachreisen, and by the shooting into the Longenort, the long point. Secondly, you should seek them with the 8 windings when one combatant has bound the other on the sword. You should understand this thus. When you come to him in the Zufeschen, you should always attack skillfully and without fear with a stroke or thrust to one of the 4 openings, whichever one you can best reach. And do not worry about what he will execute or do against you. Thereby you compel him so that he must parry you. And when he has parried you, then in the parrying, quickly seek the nearest opening with the winding on the sword. And so always attack the openings so that your opponent and not always attack the openings of your opponent and not his sword, as in the technique where it says set upon the 4 ends, stay upon if you want to learn to bring it to an end. So thought?
So basically take the center line and keep it.
I think it's not just take the center line. I think the interesting thing that I see here reading through this is what he's saying is from outside of range. When you're approaching the fight, when you're in that knock rise and you're just on the very teetering edge of being able to hit your opponent when you need that one passing step or whatever to get in. When you enter in the fight from there, strike whatever opening is open available to you. So it's not saying specifically hit to a certain thing, but look for whatever target's available to you. And then once your opponent responds to you and they parry, then start with your winding. You wind up, down, whatever, but you just keep winding on their sword. But the part that I think is interesting here is calling out that you should shoot in first to whatever opening you can reach. He's not saying target anything specific. It's just aim for something that is within your reach.
While you were talking, I looked up a image of the 4 openings and everything.
Yeah, you want to hit it on the screen share here?
Yeah, that's what I was about to do. I'm just you get back to the Zoom thing first. There we go.
I wonder if Liechtenauer is back up.
I checked like half an hour ago. Liechtenauer is still, but that was 30 minutes ago.
It's back up. It is back up. Of course, now I'm not using it, but
screen share. Do you see it on your guys' end?
Yep, I saw it.
Yep.
There it is.
Yeah. What? How? Yeah. Like
Yep.
you were talking, Chris.
So the face and the body. There's the upper corners and the lower corners of face and body.
Now, an interesting thing to note too is that one seems a little bit high because that looks like in that picture is a few inches above the navel.
Yeah.
But where was it?
Or maybe the navel's a bit too high.
He says above. He refers to von Danzig here. Says the line between above and below is based on above or below the belt of your opponent. But a thing to remember is that medieval belts tended to also be worn slightly higher than we wear them now. Now we kind of wear them a little lower with like modern pants and things, but medieval belts would be a little closer to like navel level, not at navel, but that what they call like that natural waist.
The line
So
between navel is the same as the line between your hips, the top of your hips.
yeah, that sounds about right, right? I'm just a tree trunk, so I don't have the. But yeah, so what the older text here is saying that it's basically saying anything below that belt line, which is sort of like that center of gravity.
Your
But I
natural
also
waist
like.
tends to be above
Mhm.
your navel. That's where your natural waist lies. And that's where they used to
Okay.
wear your belt. Your natural waist tends to be above your navel.
So that makes sense then, for compared to, because you were saying below the belt, but with modern factors, you're gonna aim your cut at his like leg. You're not really hitting body at all. So, just interesting notes about changes in fashion over the last 500 whatever years.
The funny thing is, that's actually how I carry my dagger, is above waist level.
Oh yeah, because it's also very natural to grab right there when that dagger's on your belt on your
Yeah.
waist. Naturally wants to come up there, comfortable. With the awesome sheaths made by Robin.
They get prettier soon too.
This is the text and gloss of how one should break the 4 openings. When you want to avenge yourself, to break the 4 openings with skill, double above, transmute below correctly. I say to you truthfully, no one can defend himself without. If you have correctly learned, he will scarcely manage a blow. Note, when an opponent earnestly strikes in at you and you want to avenge yourself on him and overcome his openings with skill so that he must unwillingly let himself be hit, then use Duplieren, the doubling, against the strong of his sword, and Mutieren, transmuting when he is weak on the sword.
Yes.
Thus I say truly that he cannot defend himself against your striking and cannot manage to strike.
That makes a lot of sense. Because yeah, when you mutate with the bind, you still have control of your opponent's sword, and when you duplier, when you double, it's like it's more. I think the dupliering is more of a uncertainty tactic, where it's like you're just not sure. It's like, okay, I know I'm here, but I'm not sure where else to go, so the best thing I can do is this. Whereas a Mutieren, it's like, aha, I have you.
And Connor, I'll add to your bit about the Duplier and the doubling that when your opponent is strong, just like it says in the text, when your opponent is strong on your blade, you don't know what to do. He's giving you that pressure. Maybe you don't feel comfortable enough to do that abnament that we talked about earlier, coming completely off, releasing. But the doubling here, because I feel a little safe because he's pushing. So because my opponent's pushing me to the side, doing this action here to double, I'm not worried about him coming off and hitting me.
Mm.
There has to be just enough strength in that. But I mean, like I said, it doesn't say it in the text at all, but I know personally with my own, I find that in my experience with sparring and things, when an opponent changes pressure in the bind, if an opponent increases pressure actively in the bind, then I like to duplier. And if they decrease pressure actively in the bind, as in they start to withdraw, then I like to do Mutieren. That's kind of how that's how I personally decide between the Duplier and Mutieren or using winding or tape or any of the other techniques. If we've come in and there's that brief moment where Jack and I have come in and we bound swords, and there's that moment of hesitation there before one of us makes any follow-on action, and all of a sudden he starts to release pressure, that's when I mutiere. If we've in that same position, we're both pushing and we both have even pressure and neither of us really has any control, and all of a sudden he tries to give that little bit of an impulse to push, that's when I dupliere. For me, again, it's all about when it's a moment of like a transition from one strength to another, like one, I should say. That was actually, that's not even like, that's not for me. That's more of a recent thing. I just realized what I was doing when I did that, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. I've been paying more attention to it now. Here, note how one should use duplieren on both sides. Note when he strikes to you from the right shoulder, then strike also at the same time from your right shoulder with strength above to his head. So Oberhau, Oberhau. If he parries and remains strong on the sword, then instantly go up with your arms and push your pommel under your right arm with your left hand and strike with the long edge with crossed arms behind his sword blade to his head. I mean, again, a lot of text, but for those of you that have been there before, Oberhau, we've come in, we've found. Just that. From here.
Oh, never mind then.
Pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, I was thinking more of a, when you started thinking of it, my mind kind of went off key and started thinking of the high vom toggle a little bit. When on the head part, I was thinking the top of the head.
Oh, you don't need to go that high with the blade. You're going to keep it a little more in the center. Yep. Another note: if he strikes from his left shoulder with the long edge above to your head, and you to him in return, and he remains strong on the sword, then go up quickly with your arms and strike behind his sword blade with the short edge. Basically, the follow up there is it can be done on either side. If we're coming in from the right and we both throw a right Oberhau and we bind, then I go to my right to strike this and hit him. If we've come in from this side and we've both thrown from the left, then instead of trying to do this way, I'm going to go this out to the side this way. So from the right, Oberhau, true edge, and when I duplieren with my true edge. From the left, Oberhau, but as I come through here, I duplieren with the false edge, with the back edge. See the rotation there? I'm trying to really exaggerate that. From here.
And that's all done instantaneously. Like as soon as that contact is made, sword to sword.
Yep, just boom.
Boom. Is that indes? Is that okay.
Yes. Yep. During. Yep. Indes. Immediately during, however you want to translate it. That's one of those words that I like to use. I like to use the German in class with some things and not with others. I translate some and I use some German because we don't have a great perfect translation for medieval context of what indes is. It's saying indes is easier than trying to explain the idea of concurrently. It just, you know what I mean? Like instantaneously. Yeah. Like there's so many different ways we can. So, like with most martial arts, I like to use a mix of the, whatever language we're, teaching in this case, obviously English, but I throw in some text from German as well. Like same thing if you go to a karate dojo, they're going to say some stuff in Japanese because that's what the original text is, and it's the best way to describe the thing.
Right.
Where are we? Okay. Last section for this. Here, note how one should use the mutieren or transmuting on both sides. Note when you have strongly struck above from your right shoulder to his head, and he has parried and is soft on the sword, so he's not giving you much pressure, then wind to your left side, short edge on his sword, and go well up with your arms and send your blade above over his sword and thrust to his lower opening. This goes on for a little bit. I'll just do this all once. Note when you have struck from your left side. Oh, I'll just say it. Note when you have struck from your left side above to his head and he has parried and is soft on the sword, then go up with your arms and hang the point over his sword and thrust to his lower opening. Thus, you can employ both techniques from all strokes depending on whether you find him weak or strong on the sword. So just like the Duplieren, and it's saying that if you're coming in from the left or the right, you can do both, but you just have to do it mirrored. So Mutieren, the transmuting, is, again, we're starting off with coming from the right. We've thrown our Oberhau. We've met, but they've given us some extra, or they haven't given us enough pressure here. So maybe even if I tried to do my regular Zorn, I might end up shooting way past them because I anticipated, let's say, a bind happening a little more in the center line. But he's pushed, or he's not pushed hard enough. So instead of being here, I'm kind of over here. In which case, I wind up with putting my short edge on their blade and drop the point down. This way I have their blade contained while I come in with a thrust, as compared to being up here. Because they were soft, I can push down and thrust to the lower openings. That hit my little thing.
I keep on forgetting that I'm muted. Well, I was gonna say that's basically the one that you could basically, if you hit it at the right point, you can knock them off balance of their feet, right?
Yeah, where that thrust into the hip.
Yeah.
If you thrust into like the pelvis, they want to have their body wants to kind of collapse in.
Yeah.
Mutieren is a fun technique, but it's really hard to do just by describing it. But there's a moment when, if our opponent is soft on the sword, if they're here and they're extending in the bind, if you do this, you push down on their sword and you end up in this kind of position here. As you come in and thrust, they end up folded up kind of like this, where there's no real strength to their sword. They don't have any purchase to make, they can't really easily get out of. The best they can do is try to backpedal and recover. But if you get it fast enough, their sword kind of collapses on them, and then you hit them down low, and they have a very, very bad day. Maybe I'll see if I can get a chance to get some video of me doing that to Sarah or something, just to show everybody. Everyone likes watching Sarah get thrown around. It's fun.
What? That's not a thing.
I'll pull up the video. No, I won't.
Didn't you already do that?
And okay, that was the other part for that. Last week. No, that was at post class last week. That's why. But like I said, that just like the Duplieren, that can work on both sides. So if we're here on the right, come in, they're weak, drive up high with the hands, the point down, and thrust. But if we come in from the left, bind here, find that they're weak, drive up again, and thrust low again. So Duplieren can work on either side, and Mutieren can work on either side. Questions on that then?
Yeah, when you mutate, do you still want to do this as opposed to like something like this and then point downwards, or which is stronger, geometrically speaking?
Good question, and it's very hard to determine talking about it. A lot of times I will have sort of a angle on the blade when I do that. You see what I mean? I'm not horizontal, or I'm not vertical, I'm not horizontal, I'm kind of canted.
Okay.
And then as I play, I depending on the opponent and depending on the pressure and depending on the tools we're using, I will change up subtleties of that angle based on how they react to it. So I might press in a little bit more and get a little more rotation this way, or I might get a little more this way, depending on what my opponent does in response. Either way, I'm still going to go low, but if they're pushing, if they try to push towards the end, I might drop down and get a little more horizontal.
Amen.
If they're giving me nothing, I might actually rotate in this way and get down a little bit more. It'll vary depending.
Where's the white plates?
Hey, Chris.
Black's not gonna
Oh,
Fine. Just do it.
oh, we can see it.
eye to ox, right?
Keep talking so we can't.
Oh, you can pin the
Yep.
screen. All right. I will. Here. Do it again.
Oh,
Okay, blah, blah,
oh no,
blah.
left ox. Bind left ox.
Who's oxing?
Yep.
I'll.
You are.
Okay. So I'm soft. Da, 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 da. You do Mutieren, please.
Right?
No, left eye.
No,
You
Matt,
left
go
eye.
the other left ox.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yeah. See how she ends up being collapsed there.
Stop it! It's not funny.
A little funny.
It's not funny.
It's always funny.
No, because you go, you go way soft, and then you got nothing.
Yeah. Well, do you really want me to hit you? We can fight, but we're on camera.
Do it.
Better?
Everyone's egging her on now. Egging both of them on.
Gotcha.
That was actually super helpful for me because I'm trying to piece it together in my mind. I've never seen it, so that was super helpful to see.
Is that good?
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, it came out looking pretty good too. I like you can see it pretty well. You got good lighting in there.
It's my little office. Chris,
yeah.
Before I forget.
Nice. That's the pinata.
It is.
Decapitated pinata.
The decapitated unicorn pinata. Yep, right there. Way to be.
Nice.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Sometimes
Okay.
I'm a visual learner, so sometimes I figure it's better for people to be able to see it.
Yeah. Thank you
I'm
to
better
both of you for that,
understanding
because that
things
one
when I
is
see it
difficult to
visually
describe.
too.
Yep. Okay, so that finishes up the section on the Zornhau and some of those plays. For next week, we're going to work on the next master cut, which is the crooked stroke or Crumpau. If you have in St. George's name, we're looking at page 98 under the section the crooked stroke, and then page 116 and 117 on later on in the same thing. So page 98 is the Liechtenauer verse itself, and page 16 and 116, 117 are the commentaries. So read through that. That's the crooked stroke. That's your homework for next week. Oh, Jack, you had some video from your Zornhau?
What do you rather see, me doing it freely or to the PAL?
Let's look at the to the air first.
All right. Share screen. I have to figure out actually which one. Oh yeah, I know. Okay, share screen. That one. All right, you see it?
Yep.
Yep.
That looks really good, Jack. So what I would say is when you go to do that, the winding,
Yeah.
My comments would be that your Zorn coming in, that initial taking control and trying to get the center line is nice and solid.
Okay.
When you go to wind, you are pulling almost, you're starting to almost pull back into a almost like a almost backward weighted ox.
Okay.
When you go to wind from there, continue it in one action. So when you've come in, don't wind here and then thrust. From here, from that first cut, wind into your target. Press in with it.
Okay.
So you're making, don't think of it as a circle, think of it as a spiral.
So basically, when I come in, when I wind, this thrust into it.
Wind and thrust it in one action. So
Okay.
this, not here, but here.
So so keep the point in one place.
Yes. You keep the point on target, but press in with the hands as you come into the wind.
So it's basically like that kind of motion?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. But otherwise, all good. And Jack, your footwork's looking much better too.
I've been trying to like I said last week, I've been trying to practice at least once a week. Maybe I'm lucky sometimes twice a week, all depending on my work and everything. But I do have one at the Pell too. If you just a second.
Yeah, let's see.
Oh wait, it's oh, there we go. All right. All right. Let's back it up.
Amazing what you can do with a jump standard.
That's actually not a jump standard. I actually really made that out of this wood I had laying around my house.
Okay, so Jack, my comments on that. Can you go back to the beginning of that one more time for me?
Yeah, just give me 1 second. We'll pull it back up. All right. Right to where?
Right to that first cut. Right there. Actually, that's stupid lag. That was like perfect for a second. Right there. Okay. We're not gonna get the timing right on that over Zoom.
Right.
Chat.
Okay.
But make that first cut in. You're pushing your hands forward when you go to cut. So as you're coming in, you're leading in with your hands and then coming in with your sword behind. Look how far out right there. Look how far
now
your
I
hands
see what
are
you're
out.
talking about.
Give it your left hand.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because
Get
easily,
the sword out first and then follow in with the point.
Yeah. I have to. That's one thing I really
you see
have.
it now?
Yeah, I have to really work on with my hands. It's coming in basically without. I've been trying to keep my hands here. Basically, just go like that. Basically, when I throw my squinter stroke, basically just keep my hands behind the sword because I've been in matches where I've gotten hit right on the hands.
What, Sarah?
Yep. I know. I cleaned up the.
Ashley and I are having a private conversation per something that we were talking about earlier about Chris. So
The hands.
the hands. Always about the freaking hands.
Not your
Don't
hands.
leave them out there.
Don't leave your hands out.
Don't leave your hands out there.
Like you always say, Chris, rule
Don't leave
number
them out.
one, don't get stabbed.
Yeah, exactly. So I think let me try this one more time. It's just okay. This one I'm gonna replay the video that I shot earlier, but I'm gonna just play it because I want to see if this plays better. This is less on. We'll look at me doing it again, but it's more on. I want to see how it works. Started screen sharing. I just want to see how smoothly this plays. That did not play smoothly at all, or is that just me?
It looked pretty
pretty
There's
smooth
a
to
little,
me.
I feel like there's a little lag to it, but it will work.
Tiny bit, but it's not bad.
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, it's not great
Okay.
either.
Oh, come on. It's fine. I mean, it's not like there's commentary.
It looked
just showing the
choppy
basic
on
action.
mobile. That's why.
Yeah.
So I just wanted it as an experiment for future video stuff. Okay.
I mean,
Well,
it looks fine to me, but
just wrap up and say thanks for tuning in. I'm having this conversation with everybody. Good feedback from everyone tonight, and I'm looking forward to being able to do this all in person again, so we can actually talk about it, but then hit each other.
Hey Chris, can you later send me the details about next Saturday so I can tell my see if it's okay for my family, because it's my parents and my brother-in-law and sister are very strict about like all that. Even like when this all started, how I was starting to give that kid lessons, I had to stop doing that too because of the whole social distancing thing. So can you just give me like the whole details and everything so I can get the okay and everything?
Yep.
At some point.
Definitely.
But
But
first night,
otherwise, everyone's homework. Remember, crump out.
Jack, there will be a separate bathroom, so you won't be using the family bathroom. There's an acre and a quarter at least of property, so everyone's going to be outside. There's 2 porches for you to put your stuff on, and if you decide to stay for food, the food will be prepared by somebody who is neurotic about germs.
And that's good because I have it's my parents are not the ones that have to really convince. It's my brother-in-law and sister who I really, really have to convince because they don't want me to
bring stuff home.
There's understandable. We have 2 kids. We understand that. I mean, it's not just for you guys' safety, but it's for the kids' safety as well, for everyone's. But yeah, no, I understand, and like I said, Ashley can attest. We were careful.
Yeah,
Right,
for sure.
Excellent. So any other questions about stuff for tonight?
No, and you didn't shoot that video. I did.
I didn't hear any babies crying though, so.
I know. No gunshots and no babies crying.
No gunshots.
There's a range across
Okay.
the
Well,
street.
thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm going to I'll stop the recording and see everybody next week.
All right, sounds good. Have a good night, guys.